They don't fear being alone. They don't fear being hated. They don't even fear being exposed. What every narcissist truly fears is being seen, not the version of them they project to the world, not the mask they polish and wear so well, but the wounded, fragile child underneath who built that mask to survive. If you've ever loved someone who made you question your worth, someone who could smile at you and slice through you with silence, someone who only gave affection when it served them, then you already know how subtle the damage can be. It doesn't come in one violent blow. It comes in patterns, in confusion, in craving, in the ache of wanting them to care just once, without you having to beg for it in invisible ways. And here's the twist that breaks people open. Narcissists don't walk around proud and untouchable. They are terrified, but not in ways that show. They are terrified that you might one day stop seeing them the way they trained you to, that you might wake up, that you might recognize the cracks in their performance, that you might stop shrinking to fit their comfort. There are truths they hope you never find, weaknesses they cover with charm, control, criticism, and coldness. And once you see those weaknesses not as weapons to use against them, but as clarity to finally free yourself, everything changes. You stop needing them to understand you. You stop arguing with their distortions. You stop asking them to love you the way you love them, because now you know. Their power over you only existed in your confusion. This isn't about labeling. It's about liberation. It's about your heart, your sanity, your story. Maybe you're still in it. Maybe you're just out. Either way, this space is yours. So if any part of you feels cracked or unseen, if any part of you has ever been made to feel too sensitive, too needy, too much, if you've ever looked into someone's eyes and seen nothing looking back, stay. Because what you're about to hear might be the very thing your soul has been quietly waiting for. And if this reaches you, if it helps you feel even one step more sane, like your pain actually has a name, then share it. Subscribe, so the next time your heart forgets its own truth, you'll know where to come back to. This is not a video, this is a mirror. The first sign, the one they work hardest to bury, is the terror of being emotionally irrelevant. Not just ignored, not just disliked, but deeply, devastatingly irrelevant in the heart of someone they once controlled. You see, narcissists don't feed off admiration the way most people think. Admiration is useful, yes. It props up the image. But what they truly feed on is emotional centrality. They need to be the sun in your sky, the thought you wake up with, the ache you fall asleep to. When you love them, they feel powerful. But when you stop needing them, when your heart stops orbiting around them, it threatens the illusion they built their identity on. That's why they act up when you go quiet. That's why they reappear the moment you start healing. That's why they get colder when you ask for warmth, and sweeter when you start to pull away. It's all about recalibrating your emotions to match their narrative. And here's what they fear you'll discover. The less you react, the more their grip weakens. When you no longer flinch, chase, cry, or plead, you're not just withdrawing love, you're shattering the power dynamic. They won't say it, but in the silence after your detachment, they spiral. Because without your emotional energy, your obsession, your anxiety, your exhaustion, they are just themselves. And for them, that's unbearable. The second hidden weakness? They can't hold a steady sense of self when they're not being reflected back through someone else's eyes. This is why your presence was never enough. You could give them your body, your attention, your full loyalty, and still they'd provoke you, withdraw, twist, test. Because it's not about love, it's about seeing themselves through you. Your reaction is their mirror. If you admire them, they glow. If you challenge them, they rot inside. If you stop looking at them like they matter, really matter, they panic. But instead of reaching inward, they lash outward. They project their inner shame onto you. You become the villain, the disappointment, the crazy one. What they never want you to realize is how fragile they are underneath. Not fragile like soft, fragile like hollow, the kind of hollowness that can't stand its own echo. And that's why they need constant reinforcement. Praise, fear, jealousy, desire, any form of emotional fuel that makes them feel real. And if you stop supplying it, if you rebuild your boundaries, reconnect with your own truth, stop playing the emotional puppet, they lose the structure that holds them up. This next part may sting, but you need to hear it. The third hidden weakness is their inability to feel real empathy. Even though they'll mimic it perfectly when it benefits them, they study you. They learn what hurts you, what comforts you, what you dream of. They don't do this to love you better, they do it to use love better, to give it when it disarms you, to withhold it when it breaks you. But true empathy? The kind that shows up without an agenda, that offers safety just because it sees you suffering. They don't know how to hold that. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't regulate the vulnerability it requires. To feel real empathy means to connect, and connection is dangerous for them, because it would mean they have to step out of their performance, let go of control, and risk being impacted by another human being. So instead, they play roles: the rescuer, the victim, the misunderstood genius. They wrap their emptiness in charm or chaos or charisma and convince you that you are the problem when you ask for something real. But this is what they fear: that you'll stop falling for the performance, that you'll start to notice how empathy only shows up when you're useful to them, that you'll see how love, in their world, is a transaction, not a bond. They fear you waking up. They fear you learning that love isn't supposed to hurt this way, that it's not supposed to be earned with silence or sacrificed self-worth. They fear you seeing the difference between love and dependency and choosing love, even if it means choosing yourself. The fourth hidden weakness cuts deeper than they'd ever admit: shame. Not the healthy kind that leads to growth, but a corrosive, silent shame that they've carried since childhood. A shame so thick and choking they built an entire persona just to outrun it. You see, most narcissists weren't born that way. They were shaped, often by abandonment, emotional neglect, or growing up with love that was conditional praise when they performed, silence when they cried, criticism when they were just being human. So they learned early: my real self isn't enough. They built a mask, polished it with accomplishments, charm, control, beauty, brilliance, whatever worked. But beneath all that, they still feel unworthy. That's why they can't handle criticism, even gentle feedback. It taps into that original wound, that hidden script they still carry. If I'm not perfect, I'll be unloved. If I'm unloved, I'll disappear. So they twist your words, make you feel cruel for being honest, punish you for expressing hurt, all to protect themselves from that unbearable shame. But here's the terrifying part for them: if you see that shame, if you get too close, they'll either implode or rage, because you're not supposed to see the real them, not the insecure, unloved child behind the mask. And if you do, if you dare to name the hurt without rage or mockery, just quietly, compassionately, they feel exposed, like a glass house cracked by one soft truth. This is why they sabotage intimacy. Not because they don't want to be close, but because closeness threatens the one thing they've worked so hard to protect: the story that they're untouchable. And maybe the most haunting part of all, they secretly crave to be loved as they are, but fear it so deeply they destroy anyone who gets too close to doing it. Because if you can love the parts they hate, what does that make of the story they've told themselves? The story where they're only lovable when they perform, so they'd rather control love than receive it. Now comes the fifth, and perhaps most powerful weakness, one they never want anyone, especially you, to know: the fear of losing control over your perception of them. Not your love, not your body, not your time, your perception, your belief in their goodness, your vision of who they are. They will tolerate your anger, your sadness, even your temporary boundaries. But what they cannot bear, what shatters them, is when you stop seeing them as powerful, when you stop admiring them, when you stop believing their version of reality. Because once that happens, they can't shape your emotions anymore. They can't guilt you. They can't make you question yourself. They can't use your hope against you. And here's the truth: they'd rather you never understand. They never had power over you. What they had was your confusion, your need for love, your tendency to give benefit of the doubt, your willingness to carry the blame just to keep the peace. But when clarity comes, the game ends. And clarity doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's walking away without a war. Sometimes it's healing in secret, not to spite them, but to free yourself. They fear that. They fear your peace, because your peace is proof that you survived them, that their version of the story wasn't the only one, that the real you, the one who kept loving through chaos, is still alive underneath the hurt. And that's the part of you they could never reach, the part they couldn't destroy, the part that is, and always has been, your deepest strength. Maybe that's what hurts the most, not the things they said, but the things they made you feel about yourself. Like how you started questioning your own memory, how you apologized just to end the silence, how you tried harder when they gave you less, how you confused their indifference with your failure, how you forgot what it feels like to be safe in someone's presence, not strategic. They didn't just make you doubt them, they made you doubt you. That's the hidden war narcissists wage. Not loud, not obvious, but slow and psychological, like erosion, wearing away your intuition, your confidence, your ability to trust your own perception. Because the less you trust yourself, the more you rely on them to define what's real. And that's the core of their power. But what they fear, more than anything else, is your return to self-trust, your quiet awakening. The day you hear that voice again, the one you silenced for peace, the one that says, "This isn't love, this doesn't feel right, I'm not crazy, I deserve better." They fear the moment you remember that love shouldn't make you sick, that relationships shouldn't feel like walking on glass, That respect isn't earned through suffering, that you don't have to beg someone to treat you like you matter. And when you start acting from that place, not out of revenge, but out of self-honor, they lose their grip. Not because you exposed them to the world, but because you stopped hiding from yourself. They might call you selfish, cold, ungrateful. They might even twist your healing into betrayal. But don't let it pull you back, because that reaction, that's fear. Not yours, theirs. They're scared that your light no longer needs their darkness to make sense. And maybe you're still grieving. Maybe you missed the version of them you fell for. The one who touched your face so gently, made you laugh like you mattered, looked at you like you were rare. That version felt real. It gave you hope. And it's okay to mourn it. But here's what they never wanted you to understand. That version wasn't fake, it was conditional. It only existed as long as you stayed small, compliant, and self-sacrificing. The moment you asked for reciprocity, the moment you needed something real, it disappeared. Not because you're too much, but because your wholeness threatened their control. They don't fear your anger. They fear your healing. They fear your clarity. They fear your power when it's no longer directed at keeping them calm, but at rebuilding yourself. And maybe no one told you this before, so let it sink in. You were never too sensitive. You were reacting to someone who trained you to distrust your emotions. You were never too needy. You just kept asking someone emotionally absent to show up. You weren't broken. You were just bending to fit into a love that had no room for your depth. And now you get to unbend. You get to remember yourself. You get to rebuild in peace, no explanations, no justifications, no begging for someone to see your worth. You already are the proof. You survived what was meant to confuse you into forgetting who you are. And slowly, without theatrics, you are becoming someone they cannot reach, not because you're hiding, but because you've risen. And here's where it all turns. Because as much as this has been about what they fear, the deeper truth is what you're finally allowed to see, what you're finally allowed to feel. Maybe even for the first time in years. Relief, not the kind that rushes in all at once, but the slow kind, the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, "You're not crazy. It really was that bad, and you didn't deserve any of it." That relief might not feel like joy. Not yet. At first, it might feel like guilt, like grief, like standing in the wreckage and wondering if you imagined it all. That's what happens when you've been gaslit for too long. You start doubting your own pain. You second-guess your own story, but keep going. Because the more space you give yourself to feel unfiltered, unedited, uncensored, the more truth will return to your body. And then comes something else they never wanted you to find: stillness. Not the stillness of silence they used as punishment, but the kind of stillness that comes when no one's manipulating the air around you, when no one's demanding you shrink, apologize, or perform. When your nervous system stops preparing for war, when your body finally realizes, it's over. You're free. That's when the healing really begins. And no, it won't be perfect. Some days you'll still miss them, or at least the version of them you hoped was real. You'll still question things, replay moments, wonder if you overreacted, if it was your fault, if maybe you could have made it work. That's normal. That's healing. That's the brain trying to make sense of something that never made sense, because it was never meant to. It was meant to control you. But you're not there anymore. You're here, breathing in your own truth. Beginning again, not because they gave you permission, but because your soul finally demanded it. And when you start moving through the world from that place, even just a little, you begin to recognize things. You see love in a new way. Not as performance, but presence. Not as power, but partnership. You stop confusing anxiety for excitement, chaos for chemistry. You notice who listens without trying to fix you, who stays soft when you open your wounds, who doesn't need to be the center of the room to be fully alive. You stop chasing people who only loved your silence. You stop trying to prove your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into love that required you to vanish. Because now you know, now you feel the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves controlling how you love them. And that is everything. Not because it makes them less, but because it makes you whole. So if you're here, if you've come this far, breathe. Not because the pain is over, but because you're not under it anymore. You made it through the fire they swore would consume you, and you came out not burned, but forged. Now you get to decide what love looks like. Not love you have to chase, not love you have to earn, not love that drains you, but the kind that meets you in your truth, stays, sees, holds, and grows. And maybe you haven't met it yet. That's okay, because the first real love you'll feel after them is the one you build with yourself, not the version they left behind, but the version they never got to break. Thank you for being here, for listening, for healing, for daring to feel what others tried to erase. If this met you in a place you couldn't name until now, Stay connected. Share this with someone who's still trying to remember themselves. Subscribe so that next time your heart forgets, you'll have a place to come back to. Leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but for the person reading who thinks they're alone. Remind them they're not. You're living proof.